I won't touch the Scrambler. The Gold Star has killed it. I won't touch the Scrambler. The BSA has killed it. Right, hello everybody. You join me on this drizzly day. Dear. Whenever you want to film something, it just gets miserable. Oh, I should just get up earlier in the morning, really, shouldn't I? The weather's nicer. But never mind. So, what are we talking about today? Well, it's actually a link back to the video I did last week on the BSA Bantam. And now that we've had the Scrambler, if you like, YouTube output has come out, which I'll talk about because you know that was incredibly controlled, really. But it's really made me question what BSA are doing and what I think may happen to the Scrambler and the Gold Star now that the Bantam is out, because it just really made me think that you know, never as a parent wanted their child to fail or manufacture a process that's going to make something fail from the off. And I'd be really interested in your thoughts on this. So I thought what we'd do, we'd nip to the Roundtree. I've come out on the Hunter simply because, you know, the Hunter is, well, to my mind anyway, is the nearest competition to the Bantam. So I just thought I'd come out on this. And it was the easiest one to get out of the carriage. So let's head to the Roundtree and let's have a talk and discuss this, because I think it's very interesting and I think it's worth discussing. So let's head to the Roundtree, everybody. Wow, it's windy. Anyway, let's crack on. So, to the point. So, yeah, obviously in the title of this video about, you know, the sister killing off its big brother, the Scrambler, and I obviously need to justify that. Now, I found it very interesting the way that BSA did their launch. So you had loads of YouTubers come from all over the world. I think it might have been 20 or 30 people. It was quite a lot, I think. And they all descended on London. I think it was the bike shed. And they launched the two bikes. So you had the Scrambler and the Bantam. They did the Bantam first. Now, I'm also doing this off the back of reading the comments that I had on my first video about this subject. In fact, I've done two, haven't I? I did one with the Scrambler when I found it in France, and then one after the launch of the Bantam to give my view on that. And what about, I started to look into some of the key features of that. Now, the reception for the Bantam, which they did first, they allowed the reviewers to get on that first. And one thing I noted very, very early on in that that launch is that it was very tightly controlled. I think the reviewers were quite constricted in what they could do with those bikes. They had very little time on them. You know, maybe they had an hour or something to themselves, and you could see that this is only sort of a general observation. You could see that the guys were quite rushed in trying to get the stuff done, which they did really well. You know, they worked with what they had. But I think it was quite interesting that they did the Bantam first, because I don't think they wanted that to be overshadowed by the Scrambler. And hold that thought, because I'll come back to that. So the Bantam itself, I think, was very well received. The thing with the Bantam, it doesn't come with any major baggage, does it? and like the Scrambler. And although there's, from some of the comments that I had on my video, particularly from India, where the jowl which it's based on is in circulation already and has been for some time, the Jawa does have some mechanical issues in early incarnations, and I think I've had an even spread of people commenting that the Jawa was a bit iffy to start with, but now it's been improved, the engine's been updated, and it's a much more reliable bike, and it's actually not a bad bike. So that's okay. I think BSA could live with that. And I think the Bantam was actually seen in a very good light at that release. I think people were very excited there was a new bike coming, and particularly the price, which was incredibly favourable. And that went as well as it could. I thought it was interesting that the reviews for the Bantam were all released at a very similar time. Certainly the UK guys that did it got them out very quickly, but I think they may have been restricted on when they could have released those, and they may have had to have possibly pre-approval. I'm not sure, but sometimes those things happen. They were very encouraging about the Bantam. I think they liked it a lot. But then you skip forward 3 days. Now both bikes were released on the same day, so they were both tested on the same day, and the guys then came down, all the reviewers came on their Scramblers from the bike shed, and they came down to Rikers, which is not far from me. Shame, if I'd have known, I'd probably have popped along. And they came down to Rikers and got to ride in there, and again I think that was a very controlled environment. They allowed them a little bit of time on the bikes to ride around separately, but very limited by the look of things. And I think that's quite deliberate. The problem I now see for the Scrambler, and this has shown up in the comments that I've had, is that people were commenting very favourably about the Bantam, but the problems with the Gold Star have followed the Scrambler, and they followed the Scrambler quite heavily. And I wonder a little bit whether the Scrambler being released on the same day as the Bantam was a little bit of, do you remember that thing that happened many years ago, bury a good day to bury bad news? Now the sad thing is that I really like that Scrambler, the look of the Scrambler. I think the Scrambler looks amazingly good. But from looking at the reviews, I think which came up on YouTube, I think they were quite guarded, and I think that they were reasonably disappointed, may have been a bit disappointed, and they were careful to say those things, and I can completely understand that, but I'm not going to put words in anybody's mouth. So, you know, anybody can watch those reviews and see what they think. But I just think that the problem with the Scrambler now is that, and from the comments I had, which were overwhelmingly, I won't touch the Scrambler, the Gold Star has killed it, I won't touch the Scrambler, the BSA has killed it. And I think that's going to be the problem. But now if we look at what BSA have done here, we know that BSA haven't helped themselves in this respect because of the poor performance of the Gold Star, not in its actual mechanical performance in how it rides as such, but in its reliability and some of the issues that it had and the quality control issues that it had, particularly with its electronics. And you know, I had this when I tested when it cut out on me and that sort of stuff. And these things still persist, although I think BSA have tried their best to rectify those, and fair play to them for doing that. But I think it's too little too late. I think the damage has already been done to the Gold Star. I'd be very interested to know how many new Gold Stars have been sold within the last 12 months. I think it'd be tiny. You could probably count it on one hand, I expect. People are probably swapping around the second-hand bikes because they've become incredibly cheap. But then we had this other issue with BSA crushing the price of the Gold Star themselves in the new retail price, you know. And it's right, some people did say, well, actually, you know, people say, well, it was £6,000, but some of those, the legacy model, I think, was I think I saw about 7,000 at one point when they first came out. And those, you know, they all seem to be around the 4995, don't they? And they seem to be hanging around in dealerships now because they just can't be shifted because of that. Of course, the other comments that I've had, and you know, justifiably, is that people say, well, I'm going to pay £6,000 for a Scrambler, and next year BSA will drop the price to 5, which I thought at the time possibly not. I thought, well, I think the Scrambler's worth £6,000, but now that I've seen the launch, the two lots of launches coming out, I think that's such a big possibility, and such a worry for prospective BSA owners that they will not touch it. And of course that causes a major headache, doesn't it? Because you've now got this situation where people won't touch the Gold Star, and they're very likely not going to touch the Scrambler for the same reason. Even though I think the Scrambler is a much, to my mind, you know, it's a much prettier bike than the, is it a prettier bike? I think it is a prettier bike than the Gold Star. It's more to my taste anyway. So with BSA exacerbating the problem by delaying the release of that Scrambler for over 2 years, you know, people saw that Scrambler, you know, at least two Birmingham bike shows ago, you know, maybe more than that, you know, a long time. And people's interest have waned. They don't trust BSA. I think that's the problem. And the comments I've had have all echoed that, have really echoed that. But in regards to the Bantam, there are people already on my channel, I've seen on other channels, said I've ordered the Bantam, I've already ordered the Bantam. I presume you can order it now, I'm not sure, I suppose I can. They're already ordering the Bantam. Now, why are they ordering the Bantam over the Scrambler? Well, there's a couple of reasons really. One, that it has no particular baggage coming with it in terms of reliability, because it's not a product we've got any knowledge of in the UK really. It's priced incredibly keenly. If you've got the two bikes side by side, you know, you've got the Gold Star, say in yellow, and you've got the Bantam in yellow, but this one is £3,500 and this one is £6,000. What are you going to go for? Because they're so similar in look and style. And I think that's the first problem. I think they're so closely aligned in looks that I think the Bantam, for its £3,500 price tag, is going to win it every time. You also now have another problem where they're quite closely aligned, is their performance. Now, you might think, well, the Gold Star is going to be much faster than the Bantam. But look at the difference in weight. You know, the Bantam is what, 50 kilos lighter? 40 kilos lighter? So you've got to think, well, that extra 17 horsepower, 15 horsepower that the Gold Star has is starting to be neutralised a little bit, isn't it? And you'd think, well, actually, do you know what? I can get really good performance out of this 30 horsepower. It's lighter, it's going to be more nimble, easier to manoeuvre around. It's going to appeal to not only young riders, but also to the riders who were going for the Gold Star because of that heritage, in loose terms. So, but you know what I mean. So, you know, the Bantam has got just as much BSA heritage as the Gold Star has, isn't it, really, in terms of its current manufacture and all the rest of it. So, you know, that's a bit of a moot point. So, I think BSA have really made it almost impossible for the Scrambler to succeed, because you've brought out a bike which is £2,500 cheaper, probably not a million miles off the performance, and lighter and all those other things, and without the baggage that it has of the Gold Star. So, you know, when I talk about, you know, the sister killing its bigger brother, it really has, but it's obviously BSA have done that. And you can't imagine that somebody at BSA didn't think this was a bad idea. You know, or is it the best of a bad job that what we're doing here? Because as far as I can see now, in terms of a new bike, I think the Gold Star is a bit of a dead duck, which is such a shame because it is such a pretty bike. you know, and do someone who wants that style of bike a real service at that price. But who's gonna? I can remember when I looked at the Scrambler the first time, and I thought, oh, you know, I can imagine lots of people getting rid of their Gold Stars to buy the Scrambler, but I don't think they will they? I don't think anybody's going to get rid of their current, you know, retro classic to get a Scrambler now. I really don't. I think it's too close to the Gold Star. It's just cosmetic, isn't it? Really, it's purely cosmetic that they've done there. And when I look at those on the engine casing, and this is a case in point, when you look at the engine casings and you've got those little black guards that go in the engine casing, they're glued on, they're double-sided taped on. As far as I can tell, they're very similar to what you can buy for bikes like this. You can buy these casing shells that go on. They're not bolted on, that's for sure, because they don't go anywhere into the screw fixing. So they're quite cheap additions, aren't they? The other thing I found quite odd was that do you remember the shock absorbers? Certainly the springs that I saw on the bike in France were Hagen's. And no one made a point of saying it's got Hagen rear suspension on it. So maybe it doesn't have that. Maybe it does have Hagen springs, I'm not sure. And I found that quite odd. But going back to this point that, you know, I just think that BSA have almost done everything that you shouldn't do to make a bike release successful. They took too long with the Scrambler. I know that someone said, you know, they'd asked BSA, why did it take so long to get this bike out? And they said something like, oh, it wasn't ready and it wasn't right and all the rest of it. Well, that's nonsense, isn't it, really? Because what have they changed? In theory, they've changed the suspension and a slightly higher ground clearance, a seat and a tank spray. So that doesn't take 2 years, does it? And I think even if they'd have thrown it out with a quick swap round of suspension and stuff, it was so easy, wasn't it? It seemed so easy. I just think they've not given up on it. They just thought, well, let's release it on the same day. People won't notice. People will only be interested in the Bantam, and we'll just throw that out. Let's just put it out there. Because I think also you might find that BSA will have a huge stock of Gold Stars lying around that they could now convert to Scramblers pretty easily. Because there's no physical changes needed to that bike apart from a change in suspension, add the little clips, the little black surrounds, and the seat and the tanks. You know, you could take those old tanks off and redo those. I'm not saying people would do that, but you'd think that there's a lot of those Gold Stars lying around at the moment, and somebody needs to do something with them. And I think they'd probably go, well, bring them all back and we'll swap them to turn them into Scramblers. But you know, it's just me thinking, because I think one of the things that made me think how many Gold Stars are lying around was at the ABR a couple of years ago. We were BSA at the ABR, and they had dozens of Gold Stars there, and you used to think, Jesus, where did they all come from? They're sitting in dealers, aren't they? They're sitting at the distributor, and nobody wanted them. So yeah, strange, wasn't it? I don't know what you think about that release. I just think it was heavily controlled. I think the guys did the best job that they could with the time that they had. I think that they are getting the bikes for a longer period now for that, which will be interesting to see how it goes. But I just think the problem with the Scrambler now is that it's competing with its own sibling, and the Bantam I think will be quite successful even on price alone. You know, if you've just passed your test and you want a small introductory bike, you know, you spent $2.5 grand on a Chinese 125, you know, you're going to get hit hard in that, but you might find that, you know, BSA dealers will give you a reasonable price for those 125s to change up to a 350. And as I said, I think the performance differential between that Bantam and the Gold Star will not be that great. I think 30 horsepower is quite an interesting spot to be in, and I think if they've got the gearing right, then I think it'll be quite close. The other thing I did notice, and somebody pointed this out when I was in France, just to come back to a point slightly, was the size of the rear sprocket on that Gold Star, on the Scrambler, and I think that will change it's going to change the way that the engine performs with its torque and all the rest of it, because it's changing the gearing. So you may find that it's a bit more urgent than the original Gold Star possibly, but we'll wait to see that. Nobody could really say much about that because they were buzzing around town. I don't think they were heading out on motorways. They were buzzing around town and they got to Rikers and then back again. So that's why I think it was very controlled, that release and that launch. Anyway, that's my extra 5 penny worth. I think the Bantam will kill the Scrambler. I think it's, looking at these two, I think it's too close. It's too close, and I don't think I've seen a parent try to kill its child so easily or so readily without too much thought, really. But there you are. Right, before it really lashes down, I've got to go to a cafe because I'm going to do something for some people. So I will see you in the next one. It's only a little Wednesday catch up, but I'll see you on Saturday. Take care, everyone. Look after yourselves.